I wrote a little song to remind you, Choice Hotels get you more of the experiences you value. The Cambria Hotel's got it all. A rooftop bar, have a ball. Bring a date, your squad, or even your mom. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Good morning, it's Wednesday, July 8, and this is the Brussels Playbook podcast. The vibe in Brussels today is quarrelsome as the EU disagrees over whether Serbia should move on to the next step in its membership process. Also on the pod, Mark Rutte tells NATO allies that Trump was right all along. And the EU's anti-fraud office has a warning that there are 200,000 fake condoms in circulation across the bloc. Oh dear, that's going to be troublesome. I'm Zoya Sheftalovich, and with me today is senior finance reporter Kathryn Carlson. Hey, Katie.
Hi, Zoya. How's it going?
I mean, it's going well. I hope that Europe isn't about to experience an unwanted baby boom because of these fake condoms.
I suppose it depends how active you are in that domain.
All right, let's not dilly-dally. Let's get straight to our first topic. It is about Serbia and its attempt to enter the EU, which has been kind of on hold for a while because of democratic backsliding. But today, the EU's 27 ambassadors are going to be meeting in their co-repair committee in Brussels, and they're going to essentially be tasked with the question of whether Serbia should move forward in its bid.
Exactly. And at the centre of the discussion is about these things that are called clusters. So for the process of being able to join the EU, having these accession negotiations, you have to go through various negotiating chapters, which are known as clusters. And today it's all a question of whether or not it's going to be able to open the new clusters, which are the reforms it needs to be able to make to align itself with things like the EU economy and social values and rule of law before they're able to join the bloc properly.
Yeah, and this is cluster 3 that might get opened today, or actually probably isn't going to get open today. And this is what our colleague Gabriel Gavin is reporting. So Gabriel has spoken with various diplomats and officials, and he has found that while the Commission is going to ask EU ambassadors to approve the opening of this cluster 3 of negotiations, the ambassadors from some countries are pushing back. And it's the Netherlands in particular that said it's going to be vetoing this move altogether. And basically they're saying, look, Serbia's not ready. It's in the midst of a political crisis that has been ongoing ever since there was this terrible catastrophe with the Novi Sad train station roof collapse where people died. Students have been protesting for months as a result of that. The president and the prime minister have sort of indicated they're going to have an election and they're not going to run again, but that hasn't really pleased anyone. And there's been lots of backsliding. And as our listeners will know, Serbia is very close to the Kremlin. President Vučić is quite close to Vladimir Putin. And so it's a difficult kind of case to make that Serbia has improved enough to enable it to open cluster 3.
Exactly. And I think it's a question of when is a reform not a reform, right? So Belgrade has a lot of reforms that it can point to. It says it's been making administrative reforms since 2022. It points to the fact that it has changed controversial laws that it brought in at the start of the year that were causing a lot of concern over judicial independence and the fight against corruption. But I don't think that answer is playing very well in Brussels because they're saying, well, if you're undoing backsliding, that's not exactly progress, and that's not exactly something we should be rewarding when we have countries like Ukraine that are waiting for accession and they're fighting against Russia.
Yeah, but the flip side of it is that the people who support this bid by Serbia to open the third cluster are saying, firstly, this isn't closing a cluster, it's just opening it. So then it will be up to Serbia if it does the work that it needs to do to complete that cluster, to close those chapters of negotiations. So this is no guarantee that Serbia is actually going to be able to enter the bloc. And then the other thing they say is that, look, if what we're doing is trying to play a game of hearts and minds where we are vying for influence in Serbia and on the other side is the Kremlin, you don't want to be squashing any hope, any dream that Serbians might have of joining the EU, because that might actually curdle public sentiment against Europe and force Serbia even closer into the Kremlin's arms.
Exactly. So in Gabriel's story, Serbia's EU integration minister said that Serbia's, is frustrated. It's been stuck at this point in the accession negotiations for 5 years. He said that if they keep stalling, it could be an incentive against future reforms and even push it closer towards Russia, effectively.
But the flip side of it is that the Commission, in its own confidential report on Serbia, which Politico has obtained, said that there have been significant human rights concerns and found that there's been no progress in a number of large-scale corruption cases. So, in its own findings, the commission is saying, look, Serbia's not doing so well. So I think this is kind of the problem, that on the one hand, the EU does want to encourage Serbia and Serbians, but on the other hand, they don't want to encourage Vucic and they don't want to reward bad behavior. So it's a real tricky one. We'll see what happens today at that co-repair meeting. Katie, before we move to our second topic, let's quickly update our listeners on this big Marine Le Pen verdict that came through yesterday. So listeners will remember we've been talking about this for months. She was charged and found guilty on embezzlement of EU funding charges. Now, the court has found her guilty, has confirmed that guilty verdict, but it did reduce her sentence and suspended the sentence. So she technically could now run for president, but she would have to do it while wearing an ankle monitor because she's under house arrest. So that complicates matters. Marine Le Pen last night gave an interview and she said that she was going to run. So we'll see how she does with that ankle monitor, but it's going to be an interesting French presidential campaign given the top candidate of the party that's ahead in the polls is running from home. Righto, Katie, enough of Le Pen. Let's go to Le Sword.
Le Pen is mightier than the sword. Or maybe not.
Alrighty, Katie, our second story of the day, it is again NATO because this big summit is continuing in Ankara today. Yesterday, we were talking about the fact that this is going to be a bit of a Trump management exercise of like showing him the money, keeping things short, avoiding surprises, and convincing Trump that Europe is taking its defense seriously. But things are starting to kick off today.
Yeah, so definitely after arrival day of the summit, that show me the money approach is definitely playing out. We have, in fact, been shown the money. So there have been tons of contract announcements that have run into tens of billions of euros. Canada has said that it's looking at submarines that are built in Germany. Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, says that would be the biggest defense contract in German history. NATO allies are looking at updates to surveillance planes to replace an aging fleet that they have.
The AWACS. I love the word AWACS. It's some sort of surveillance plane, is what it is.
Anyway, there's also been a package of missile deals that were intended to move more production from the US to Europe. So there's going to be more air defense missiles, more European capacity to maintain the Patriot interceptors, which are those missiles the Ukraine is currently using to shoot down Russian attacks. So very much a contract-heavy, business-heavy, art of the big NATO deal heavy day.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the art of the big NATO deal, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, he actually sat down with our colleague Dasha Burns, who hosts Politico's The Conversation podcast, to talk about essentially what's been happening in Ankara and what he hopes to achieve. And his message wasn't particularly subtle. He basically said, look, admit it, Trump was right, guys. Europe was spending too little. NATO was too dependent on the US. And yeah, allies should be pushing towards a much bigger defense spending. And now they're doing that because of Trump. So let's have a bit of a listen here. It's Dasha Burns with Mark Rutte.
Mr. Secretary, this summit begins under extraordinary circumstances. NATO is asking allies to undertake the biggest increase in defense spending in history. Russia's war in Ukraine still rages on and now escalating. The conflict in the Middle East is still continuing, and questions remain about America's long-term role in European security. Have you ever walked into a NATO summit where the stakes felt higher than they do this morning?
I feel excited. Not enough people, I think, have already grasped that this is transformational. It is really fundamental what is going to happen. And basically, many people think, hey, why do we have to do all of this and spend the extra money? And, of course, Ukraine, most of us, of course, agree it has to be done. But this is transformational for only one reason, because I strongly believe that the NATO we had only 3 or 4 years ago, going forward, would not have been sustainable. Over-reliant on the United States, Europe not spending enough, not producing enough, both in the US and in Europe. And all of this is now changing rapidly. And this is really great news.
Of course, so much of this has been driven by President Trump. And U.S. Ambassador Matt Whitaker says Washington is now considering consequences for allies that don't have a credible path to 5%. Do you agree with that approach?
Well, of course, every ally can decide how they want to keep the others to account. So that's totally fine, but that's between allies individually. What I'm looking at is the overall numbers, and here you see the success story. The success story is that when you combine 2025 and 2026, Canadians and Europeans spending more than $250 billion extra compared to 2024. This is amazing. I would say we have to do this because of Russia. We also have to do this because of equalizing European spending with the United States. And this is President Trump basically achieving what since Eisenhower American presidents tried to achieve, which is to equalize the defense spending between the US and Europe. Trump is now achieving that.
So that was pretty optimistic, Ruta, that we heard from Katie.
Yeah, I think he's the consummate diplomat, let's say. But he did have a couple of really important messages in there. I mean, it's clear that he's trying to toe this line between being the NATO sick-gen that calls Trump daddy and uses intense flattery to keep him on side while doing the actual diplomacy behind closed doors to keep everybody else on board, with also, you know, using a lot of Trump's language and the US's pet issues to sort of push the overall direction of the alliance. So he talked about Trump achieving something that the US has wanted to change since Eisenhower, of making a historic correction inside NATO, of essentially pushing the alliance in more of a European direction, having the Europeans stump up more money, stump up more production, not rely on Washington as much. And he also even sort of extended that flattery to the Iran war. He talked about Europe having been a sort of jumping off spot for the US aerial operations, and the fact that maybe that Operation Epic Fury couldn't even have happened without all of the help that the Europeans were kind of giving. And at the same time, he's also sort of framing the common challenges that the Americans and the Europeans are facing together. So he talks a lot about Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and the threats that are coming from those countries working together. So he's fostering this narrative of there being shared adversaries between Europe and the US, and that it not all being about who's pulling funding and who's invading Greenland.
It sounded to me like there was an audience of one for that interview, and that audience was sitting in the White House, or actually also probably en route to Ankara himself. It really did sound like it was a very Trump-focused interview. So I think the old management of Trump is still happening. But it was also kind of interesting, you know, like as a person who stayed up for the Football World Cup, he also talked about that red card.
Okay, I've said the consummate diplomat. Let's also say possibly the master of the non-answer, or the master of sidestepping the answer. So it's not easy to go toe-to-toe with Dasha, but he's pretty good at it. He was asked about the red card fiasco with the US, Donald Trump personally intervening with FIFA to try and get a red card withdrawn so that one of their team could play. Let's say, didn't make a difference in the end. The US lost to Belgium. But he said, oh, I haven't been watching the World Cup since the Netherlands were knocked out.
That's so convenient. Oh,
very convenient. I'm sure they're not showing it anywhere in Ankara.
Impossible. Well, look, that quote is in the full interview, so folks will have to listen to the interview on our website, or if you listen to the podcast version of the conversation, that will be dropping on Friday. The link will be in our show notes. All right, Katie, let's wrap it up with our third story of the day.
Zoya.
It's a little bit of public service journalism. Listen, it's a public health announcement. It really is. It's serious, Katie. Stop giggling. The European Anti-Fraud Office, OLAF, it's warning that there are counterfeit condoms on the loose in Europe.
And the fake condoms are using the name and logo of a well-known brand. So I'm going to put my sex ed teacher hat on now and say fake condoms are dangerous because they can allow for unwanted pregnancies, they can allow the spread of sexually transmitted infections, and, here's the counterfeit part, they can expose you to unsafe chemicals.
Oh, yikes. Well, we don't actually, the OLAF press release did not mention the name of the company that these things are being ascribed to. So what they said is that the counterfeit ones are coming from a common source in China, and they've been able to trace this cross-border trafficking route and identify the exporter behind the shipment. And there are around about 200,000 of these things out there. Now, they were able to disrupt the flow of these fake condoms. My God, I can't stop with these puns. They were able to disrupt the flow, but there might still be some out there, right?
Yes, and this was also because they were able to get through customs by being labeled as toys rather than medical devices. So I will leave you to your own interpretations of that. But Zoya, how do you identify a fake condom if we don't know the names of these things?
So There are a few things you've got to look out for. Firstly, you want a batch number and an expiry date on the old Boxerino. You want to find the health and safety certifications. Some have some anti-counterfeit measures, like a QR code that you can scan to check them out. Although I don't know that I'd be scanning random QR codes on boxes of condoms that might be fake. So I'm going to leave that one up to your listener discretion. But yeah, look for any like blurred or crappy printing on the packaging. And also, of course, the old adage, if it's too cheap to be true, it is too cheap to be true. So, if you're paying a ridiculously low price, then you should be a bit worried.
Stay safe out there, people.
Actually, I wouldn't mind hearing from our listeners. Have you folks spotted any fake products out there that might have slipped through the EU customs net? What have you found? What have you seen? Let us know. Link is in the show notes. Hey, Katie, yesterday we were speaking about this chaotic entry-exit system that's been wreaking havoc at Schengen borders. We've been speaking about the Eurostar, and we've had someone write in about their experience on the Eurostar.
I am so glad to hear that the one-woman crusade I have been running against the Eurostar delays is now a two-woman crusade, because we've had Angie from France write in. She says she's a Eurostar pro because she travels to London twice a month, but recently the border checks have been a bit of a hassle, she says. She says last Friday there were so many of us still waiting at passport control that the train had to be delayed, but in a win for the Brits, she said on the London side she never had any problem because there are less rules.
Oh, well, Brexit dividend.
Brexit dividend, if there ever was one.
Alrighty, folks, that's just about it from us today. But a reminder, we have a few tote bags left over. So if you send us a little video on WhatsApp about how you found us, what stories you've enjoyed from the pod, maybe it's today's about the counterfeit condoms. I don't know. Speak to you folks tomorrow.
A burst pipe, a dead water heater, the AC calling it quits. Who do you call? HomeServe is an easy way to handle unexpected home repairs with plans covering stuff basic homeowners insurance usually won't. Instead of scrambling for a contractor, you make one call to get the repair process started. Join the millions of customers who trust HomeServe right now. Go to homeserve.com/podcast for 50% less your first year. That's homeserve.com/podcast. Savings compared to renewal price. Void in Florida.